I stepped out of the hospital elevator still wearing the clothes I'd slept in. My husband had been gone for 11 days and I hadn't really slept in 11 days either. Not real sleep, just the kind where you close your eyes and your brain keeps replaying the same 48 hours over and over until you can't tell what's a memory and what's a nightmare. His name was Edmund. Edmund Kessler. He was 53 years old, and he had a laugh that filled every room he walked into, and he died of a massive cardiac arrest on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee downstairs. By the time the paramedics got to our bedroom, there was nothing left to do. We had been married for 6 years. I was 29 when we met at a conference in Chicago. He was a real estate developer. I was doing project management consulting, and he spilled coffee on my laptop bag and apologized for 10 minutes straight. I fell in love with how seriously he took his own mistakes. He never brushed anything off. He always meant what he said. After he died, I moved through those first 2 weeks like I was underwater. His attorney had already contacted me. There was a will. Edmund had been meticulous about everything, including that he had left me the house, his business accounts, and the majority of his assets. His estate was substantial. I won't give the exact number here because that's not really the point of this story, but substantial is the right word. Enough to make people act in ways I never expected. Enough to show me who everyone around me actually was. Edmund's family had never warmed to me. His mother had made that clear from the beginning. Polite at dinners, cold everywhere else. His sister had her husband's last name and her mother's personality. They had both assumed, I think, that Edmund's wealth would eventually stay within their idea of the family, meaning it would come back to them. The fact that he had married a woman 15 years younger, a woman who came from a working-class family in Ohio with no connections to their world, had always been a source of quiet resentment that nobody bothered to hide very hard. But I had never imagined what that resentment could actually look like when there was real money on the table. It was the 13th day after Edmund died. His mother had offered to host a small gathering at her house. Just family, she said, to remember Edmund and be together. I had been to the memorial service. I had stood at the gravesite. I had shaken hands and accepted condolences from dozens of people I barely knew, and I was exhausted in a way that went past my bones. But she was Edmund's mother. I said yes. I drove myself there and arrived about 10 minutes later than I'd planned because I sat in my car in her driveway for a while, just trying to get myself together. I finally got out, walked up the front steps, and the door was unlocked. That wasn't unusual. She always left it unlocked when she was expecting people. What was unusual was that I could hear voices before I even touched the door handle. I don't know why I didn't knock. Maybe I was too tired to think about it. Maybe some part of me already knew something was wrong, in the way your body sometimes figures things out before your mind does. I pushed the door open quietly and stepped into the front hall, and I could hear my mother-in-law's voice coming from the living room, maybe 20 feet away. The door was mostly closed, just a thin slice of light coming through. I heard her say, "The attorney said the will is airtight, but that doesn't mean we can't contest it. There's always the undue influence argument." And then my sister-in-law's voice. She was with him for 6 years. "They're going to laugh at us. They won't laugh if we get the right attorney. Somebody who handles these cases. And the house? She's on the deed, but she wasn't on the business accounts before he amended them. That amendment was 18 months ago. If we can argue he wasn't of sound mind, he was completely of sound mind, and you know it." "I know that, but can we prove he wasn't?" "That's a different question." I stood there in that hallway and I didn't move. I don't think I was breathing. I remember looking down at my own hands like they belonged to someone else. My sister-in-law's voice again. "What about the other stuff? The jewelry?" She mentioned a few pieces of his mother's that came to her. "Those were family pieces. They should never have left this family. She's going to notice if things go missing. She's barely holding herself together. She won't notice everything right away." I pressed my back against the wall of that hallway and I thought about my husband. I thought about him sitting at the kitchen table at midnight going over documents, because he wanted everything to be right, because he was that kind of person, because he believed in doing things properly and treating people with honesty. And I thought about his mother and his sister, the people he had loved his whole life, standing 20 feet away from me talking about how to dismantle everything he had set up to protect me. I didn't walk into that room. I knew that if I walked in, I would say something I couldn't take back, and then they would know exactly what I'd heard and they would have time to prepare. I was grieving, and I was devastated, and I was shaking from the inside out. But some cold, clear part of me had already made a decision. I walked back out the front door, as quietly as I had come in. I sat in my car and I called my own attorney. Not Edmund's estate attorney. My attorney. A woman named Adrienne, who I had used once before per contract dispute years earlier, and had been so sharp and so calm that I'd kept her number. She answered on the second ring, and I told her what I'd heard, word for word as best as I could remember it. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. "Don't go back inside," she said. "Drive home. Don't discuss any financial matters with Edmund's family from this point forward without me present. Don't let them in your house. If they ask about personal items, jewelry, anything, tell them you need to speak with your attorney first." "They're inside right now," I said. "They think I'm about to walk through that door. Let them think that for as long as you need. You don't owe them an explanation. Go home." I went home. I didn't call to say I wasn't coming. I know that sounds cold, but I also knew that the moment they realized I'd been there and left without saying anything, they would wonder what I'd heard, and that uncertainty was more useful to me than anything I could have said in that room. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life, and they were hard in a different way than the grief. The grief was like weather. It moved through me in waves, unpredictable, overwhelming, impossible to argue with. This was something else. This was having to be strategic and clear-eyed at the exact moment when every part of me wanted to collapse. Adrienne moved fast. She contacted Edmund's estate attorney and made sure every asset was properly documented and frozen from any potential third-party interference. She sent a formal letter to my mother-in-law's attorney. Yes, they had already retained one by then, making clear that any attempt to challenge the will would be met with full legal response, and that any removal of property from the marital home or from Edmund's estate without court authorization would be treated as theft. The theft part mattered because of what happened next. 3 days after I didn't show up to that gathering, my sister-in-law called me. She was warm on the phone, warmer than she had ever been in 6 years of family dinners. She said she was worried about me. She said she wanted to come over and help me sort through some of Edmund's things, because going through a loved one's belongings alone was too painful and she wanted to support me. I said I appreciated that, but I wasn't ready to go through his things yet. She called again 2 days later. Same offer. Same warmth that felt like a coat that didn't fit right. I said I was still not ready. What I didn't tell her was that I had already had a locksmith change every lock in the house. I had also quietly inventoried every piece of jewelry, every valuable item, everything that could have walked out the door, because I remembered what I'd heard in that hallway about family pieces and things going missing. I photographed everything. I sent the photos and a written inventory to Adrienne. The inventory turned out to be important. 6 weeks after Edmund died, I was in a meeting with Adrienne when she received a message from the estate attorney. 2 pieces of jewelry were being claimed by my mother-in-law as family heirlooms that had been loaned, not gifted, to Edmund's household. A pearl necklace and a pair of diamond earrings. She was requesting their return. I knew those pieces. They were beautiful. Edmund had told me they belonged to his grandmother and that he wanted me to have them. He told me that clearly, directly, without any ambiguity. On our 3rd anniversary, when he placed them in my hands and said his grandmother would have loved me, he had also, as it turned out, documented that in writing, not in the will, just in a personal letter that he had kept in a fireproof lockbox in his home office along with other important documents. I had found it when I went through the lockbox in those early days. I had read it and cried over it and then filed it away, not realizing yet that I would need it. We submitted that letter. We submitted photographs of me wearing those pieces at family events over the years. We submitted a sworn statement from Edmund's longtime personal assistant, a woman who had worked with him for 14 years and who had been at our house on the anniversary in question and had witnessed him giving them to me. My mother-in-law's claim went nowhere. The challenge to the will also went nowhere. It took months. There were meetings and filings and moments when Adrienne would call me and explain some procedural development in a voice so calm it made me feel like I was the one panicking unnecessarily. But it went nowhere, because Edmund had been of sound mind, because the will had been properly executed, because undue influence requires evidence. and there was none. And because at every turn, Adrian was 3 steps ahead of them. I want to say something here that I've thought about a lot. My mother-in-law lost her son. My sister-in-law lost her brother. I don't think grief makes people good or bad. I think it strips away the things they were using to cover up who they already were. These women were not driven to do what they did by grief. They were driven by the same thing they had always been driven by, which was a belief that certain things belonged to them by right, and that I was an outsider who had no legitimate claim to a life I had built with a man who chose me every single day we were together. That belief was not my problem to fix. The legal process concluded about 8 months after Edmund died. I was awarded full and uncontested control of the estate. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law received nothing beyond what Edmund had specified in the will, which was a modest bequest to each of them that he had included out of love, not obligation. Edmund had been a fair man. I have not spoken to either of them since. That is not a decision I made in anger. It's a decision I made because I spent 8 months watching them try to take apart everything my husband had worked to leave me, and at no point did either of them ask how I was doing, express any genuine concern for my well-being, or treat me as a person who had also lost someone she loved. I was a target. That's all I was to them. I don't hate them. Hating someone requires an ongoing investment of energy that I have decided to spend differently. I moved out of the house Edmund and I had shared. That was my choice, not theirs. I chose it because I needed a space that was entirely mine, that didn't have his absence built into every hallway and doorway. I found an apartment in a city I had always wanted to live in, a city I had mentioned to Edmund once on a drive, and he had said, "Why don't we move there then?" with the kind of easy generosity that was so completely him. And I cried a lot when I signed the lease. But it was the right kind of crying. I've been here for almost a year now. I am 31 years old. I have a good attorney. I have 2 friends from before Edmund who showed up for me in ways I will never stop being grateful for. I have a therapist who doesn't let me get away with anything. I have Edmund's grandmother's pearl necklace in a velvet box on my dresser, and sometimes I take it out and hold it and think about him telling me his grandmother would have loved me, and I believe he was right. Here's what I want people to take from this if they take anything at all. Document everything. Not because you're paranoid, because the people around you may behave in ways you never anticipated, and documentation is the only thing that speaks a language grief cannot access. Edmund documented things because he was careful and loving and thorough. That documentation protected me when I couldn't protect myself. Trust the cold, clear part of yourself, even when the rest of you is shattered. It exists for a reason. It showed up for me in that hallway, and it told me to walk back out the door instead of walking in. And it was right. Your instincts don't stop working just because your heart is broken. And the last thing, you are allowed to cut people off without a trial. You are not required to present your case to the people who hurt you and wait for their verdict. The moment I walked out of that hallway, I had all the information I needed. I didn't owe them a confrontation. I didn't owe them an explanation. I owed myself a life, and I have been working on building it ever since. Edmund would have liked this city. I tell him that sometimes when I'm walking somewhere and the light is doing something beautiful. I tell him he would have liked it here. And then I keep walking, because that's what you do. You keep walking. You take the necklace out of the box and you put it back. You call your attorney and your therapist and your 2 friends who showed up. You wake up in your own apartment, in your own city, and you remember that the people who tried to take everything from you failed, and that the man who loved you made sure they would. That's the story. That's all of it, and I'm still here. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone going through something like this, if they were sitting across from me right now. Not platitudes. Not the kind of thing people say at funerals when they don't know what else to do. Something real. Here's what I keep coming back to. The way people treat you when you are at your lowest is not a reflection of your grief. It's a reflection of their character. Edmund's mother and sister didn't become different people when he died. They became more themselves. The loss burned away whatever politeness had been sitting on top of who they actually were, and what was underneath had always been there. I just hadn't been willing to see it clearly while Edmund was alive, because seeing it clearly would have required me to do something about it, and I wasn't ready. That's the tricky thing about clarity. It usually shows up at the worst possible time. What I learned, and I mean really learned, in my body, not just as an idea I could repeat, is that intelligence without action is just suffering with extra steps. I heard what they were planning in that hallway. I had a choice. I could walk into that room and confront them and feel righteous for about 15 minutes, or I could walk back out and use what I knew. Grief wanted me to confront them. The clearer part of me knew better, choosing the harder thing in that moment, staying quiet, driving home, making the call. That was the most important decision I made in those 8 months. There is a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't announce itself. It just makes the next right move, and then the next one, while everything inside is falling apart. I had to learn that kind of courage on the fly, in a situation I never would have chosen. And I am not proud of how much I resisted it. There were nights when I wanted to call his sister and tell her exactly what I thought of her. Adrian talked me down more than once. My therapist talked me down more than once. The patience required was enormous. But it was the right kind of enormous. Edmund was a careful man because he understood something I have only recently started to understand myself, that how you do things matters as much as what you do. He documented the jewelry. He wrote the letter. He structured the will properly, not because he expected to be betrayed, because he respected the people he loved enough to be clear with them. His carefulness protected me from people who had none of it. That's what I mean when I say actions have weight. The choices he made quietly, years before he died, outweighed everything his family tried to do in those 8 months. Integrity doesn't expire. It just waits. I'm still building. Some days that feels like enough, and some days it doesn't, and I've made peace with the fact that both of those things can be true at once. I have Edmund's grandmother's pearls. I have my apartment. I have 2 friends who showed up. And an attorney who answers on the second ring. I have a life that nobody managed to take from me, not because I was lucky, but because I made the cold, clear choice in that hallway and every day after it. That's what I want you to walk away with. Not that the world is fair. It isn't always. Not that good people are always protected. They aren't. But that you have more agency than grief lets you believe. That the steadiest thing you can do when someone tries to take what's yours is refuse to hand them the advantage of your panic. Go home. Make the call. Document everything. And then keep walking, because that's what you do. You keep walking.